Hi, welcome back. I'm very excited to be here today. I have taken a long break from sewing, but I'm back with an exciting project. I am going to first make a pattern on paper, and then from that pattern, make a garment. Without too much talking, let's get into making the pattern. Okay, here are all of my measurements. I've got some craft paper, a couple of tools to help me cut, straight lines, and a pen. First, I'm starting with the front bodice. The width of this piece is going to be 12.5 inches. I'm going to mark that down and then combine all of these little notches. And then the height from my shoulder to below my bust, I landed on 14 inches, so I'm going to mark that out here. Then for the shoulder, I wanted kind of a drop shoulder just to be able to fit broader shoulders if I was to remake this for somebody else. So I decided to go with 7.5 inches for my shoulder width. And then for the depth of my V, 11 inches. I'm going to connect those two lines and mark that out. For the back panel, the measurements are the same. We're going to do 12.5 inches for the width. And then again for the height is 14 inches. For the back piece, for our shoulders to match up, it had to be 7.5 inches again to connect to the front. And then for the depth of the back neckline, I went down 2 inches, and I'm just going to draw a little curved line. And then this piece will be cut on the fold just to save on some craft paper. And lastly, I'm going to make a pattern for the sleeve. The length for this is 17 inches. I wanted that from my shoulder to about my wrist. I'll plot those lines. And then again, this one will be cut on the fold. So the measurement here is 24 inches, but I'm going to cut that in half to 12 inches. And when I go to cut it out, do it on a folded piece of fabric. I pre-cut these two skirt pieces at 40 inches wide by 39 inches in length. I'm going to cut one of them in half, and this will be the front portion where the buttons will be. I'm starting to cut out my front bodice pieces. We're just going to need 2 of these, one for the left, one for the right. I'm placing the right sides together so we have an equal pair. These are our 2 front pieces. Moving on to the back panel, again cutting on a folded piece of fabric. I'll cut that out. Lastly, the sleeves, just 2 sets of this, cut on a folded piece of fabric. Next up are the wrist cuffs. These measure at 12 inches by 2.5. And then the last pieces I cut are the pockets. You need 2 pairs of right sides together pieces. The way that I like to cut a pocket is to first start with a straight line. I'll set my hand down and then cut a crescent shape around my hand, just to know that my hand's going to fit in the pocket. Next step is overlocking on my edges. Of course, you can zigzag here. And then we will create the top. With the back panel facing up, we're going to take our front bodice pieces facing down and attach at the shoulder line. I'm going to pin all along the top and then sew with about 1/4 inch seam allowance. Next, we're going to attach the sleeve. So this is going to be your long rectangle. You're going to place it right sides together, and we'll be leaving about 1 3/8 of an inch from each side. So you can measure that out, plot it right in the center, and pin it down. And that's what our sleeve will look like. So we turn it right side out. Next, we're going to sew up the sleeve. So placing right sides together, I'm going to pin right underneath where the armpit will be. And as we sew, we'll start up the waistline, pivot, and then up the sleeve. Next, we are going to make the gathering stitch. Switching to a longer stitch length and stitching just right outside the serging line I made earlier. Then I'm going to take the bobbin thread, gently pull and move the fabric along to create my gathers. It's hard to know how much to gather until you finish the wrist cuffs, so let's move on to that. I'm just going to take a wrist cuff, sew them right sides together to make a full loop. And then in this way, we know how much to gather the sleeve. Then we're going to pin the right side of the cuff to the wrong side of the dress sleeve. I love to take off the additional part of the machine just to fit the wrist around the machine. And I'm going to sew that on. And then I'm going to flip the dress right side out. So now we're looking at the wrong side of the wrist cuff, which we will now fold twice towards the good side of the dress and pin in place. It'll look like this all pinned. I'm going to take it to the machine, and when I'm doing a top stitch, I like to use my wide stitch, so I moved it to a longer stitch and top stitch that on. Once you do both sleeves, our top is completed, and then we will move on to the skirt. I'm going to take the two separate front panels and start attaching the pockets. I'm going down 5 inches. This is just where I like my pockets. This can obviously move if you are taller. I'm going to pin this in place, and then the same thing on the other side. Measure 5 inches down, then we're going to sew with a 1/4 seam allowance to attach the pockets. I also did this with the larger back panel of the skirt. So with those two done, we will face the good sides of the skirts together and the good sides of the pockets together and pin all along the side seam, around the pocket, and up towards what will be the waistband. Then we'll take it to the machine, sewing around the pocket. I'm not going to show you that here. I've got lots of other videos of me doing pockets. So next up, we are going to create our gathering stitch for the waistline, which will create that lovely ruffled effect once we attach the skirt to the top bodice. So I'm going to start pulling on my thread, moving the fabric along, and gathering up the skirt. The length we're looking for here is going to match the waistline of the bodice. So matching up the side seams first, I'm going to pin here. Same thing on the other side. And then I like to get the edges first and then pin everything in the center together, moving things around as I go if I need to. And then we're going to sew this all together. Give it a quick try on. This is actually when my camera died, so moving on to the placket. For the length, I took the measurement of the bottom of the dress all the way up around the neckline to the other bottom of the dress and added about 1 inch on both sides. I knew that I wanted the placket to overhang on the bottom, and I'll show you how to close that up soon. So for me, that looked like 121.5 inches by 3 inches. However, I did not have that much scrap left over, so I took 2 pieces that were about 61 inches and sewed them together to make one long strip. And then we will get to attach it to the dress. Starting at the back center neckline, I am facing the good side of the placket strip to the bad side of the dress, and I'm going to pin this all the way along the length of the inside of the dress. We're going to sew this on. Here you can see that I have a little bit hanging over. We will deal with that later. So here we go for the fold. We've got this little excess piece. We are going to tuck it in towards the dress and then fold in twice to create our placket. Now I'm going to pin that in place. I'm sure there are more amazing ways to do this, but this is what I found that works for me. So I'm going to double fold that placket strip. I guess that's what I'm calling it now. And we're going to stitch that on. I'm starting at the center edge of the dress just to sew that little opening closed, and then I'm going to pivot and then sew running parallel to the edge of the placket piece. Again, using a wider stitch length for my top stitch. This is how she's looking so far. Next up is buttons. Honestly, I might have gone with white buttons, but these wooden buttons were all I had on hand, and I am extremely lazy. So I'm going to start mapping these out, starting right at the V for my first button. I knew I wanted one right where the skirt started, and that was about 2 inches apart. So I added one every 2 inches and added about 7 buttons so I could have a little slit in the front. Personal preference, you can obviously button it all the way down if you want. And she's done. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you have any questions, leave them below. Like the video if you enjoyed this, and subscribe to Mindful May if you haven't. I'll see you next time. Cheers.